Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fiber Broadband Association's Fiber for Breakfast. We're now in our 14th episode of 2023. Before we kick off, I'd like to thank Wesco, the platinum sponsor of Fiber for Breakfast, and our gold sponsor, Gray Bar. Last Thursday, the Fiber Broadband Association had another sold-out crowd at our Regional Fiber Connect workshop in Oklahoma City. This was a great event where we were able to put a strong focus on tribal broadband, and we were greatly appreciative for the tribal members from the Choctaw, Kickapoo, Muskogee, Nation Creek, and Sac and Fox Nations, among others. It was also great to hear updates from the state broadband offices. In Oklahoma City, we had a great panel from the Oklahoma, Kansas, and Louisiana broadband offices. In addition, we did a 2-day train-the-trainer class with one of our largest classes of future fiber optic technician trainers. Our next Regional Fiber Connect workshop will be held on May 16th in Austin, Texas. You're not going to want to miss that. Please register early because the hotels and the workshops sell out quickly. Last Wednesday, the Fiber Broadband Association, along with research analyst firm Cartesian, held a webinar on developing a rational methodology to setting the BEADS program's extremely high cost threshold or high cost per location threshold. The setting of this extremely high cost threshold will be very important as each state determines the delicate balance between ensuring their citizens get fiber and ensuring coverage in these extremely high cost areas. If you missed this webinar, you can watch the replay by going to the FBA website under events. That brings us to today's Fiber for Breakfast session with Mary Jander of Futuriom and Debbie Kish, the Vice President of Research at Fiber Broadband Association, on communities thrive with fiber broadband. But before we formally introduce today's guest, I'd like to introduce Trish Ehlers from our team, who's going to walk us through some housekeeping items.
Thanks, Gary, and good morning to everyone who's joined us this morning. Before I go over a few logistical items, I'd like to once again thank the platinum sponsor of Fiber for Breakfast, Wesco, and our gold sponsor, Gray Bar. Now, if everyone would please keep in mind that you're all in listen mode only. To ask a question, you can just type it into the question box located within your control panel on the right side of your screen. We'll host a Q&A session with our panelists at the end of today's webinar. The presentation is being recorded and will be available on FBA's website within 24 to 48 hours. You can find the recording in the Events tab under the Fiber for Breakfast option. At the conclusion of today's presentation, you'll be prompted to complete a brief feedback survey. Please take a minute to do so. We appreciate your input. I'll pass it back to Gary now to introduce our panelists and get us started. Gary?
Thanks, Trish, and good morning. I'm Gary Bolton, the President and CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association. Last week on Fiber for Breakfast, we heard from Angela D. Bennett from NTIA for a session on Internet for All, addressing the digital equity gap in the U.S. Angie discussed NTIA's $2.75 billion digital equity program. It actually has 3 programs. It has a state planning grant program. It's $60 million. It goes to all 56 states and territories and tribal communities to develop digital equity plans. And then these plans will be submitted to NTIA in early 2024. And then the funding to implement these plans will be the $1.44 billion state capacity grant program and the $1.25 billion competitive grant program that's open to local municipalities, nonprofits, community anchor institutions that serve the covered populations under the Act. This brings us to today's Fiber for Breakfast session with Mary Jander of Futuriom and Debbie Kish, the Vice President of Research at Fiber Broadband, on communities thrive with fiber broadband. So Mary Jander is a senior analyst and editor at Futuriom. Mary has worked in the technology journalism and as an analyst for more than 30 years. She was a senior member of the editorial staff at McGraw-Hill's Data Communications before joining the founding team, along with Scott Rainovich, her partner, of the watershed online publication Light Reading in 1999. She subsequently held senior editorial jobs in Light Reading spin-off technology publications, including Byte and Switch and Future Cities. She joined Futuriom in 2019. And Debbie Kish is the Vice President of Research and Workforce Development for the Fiber Broadband Association. Prior to joining FBA, Debbie was a research analyst at Gartner for about 20 years. And in her role at FBA, she's is leading research initiatives, as well as the FBA's team leading the building of Optic, which is our optical telecommunications installer certification. And it's the Fiber Broadband Association certification program. Debbie's also on the TIRAP, Telecommunications Industry Registered Apprenticeship Advisory Committee. So welcome, Mary and Debbie, and for our audience, please type in your questions as we go, and we'll work them in the Q&A at the end. With that, I'll turn things over to Debbie.
Thanks, Gary. So we had started a body of research to show how fiber communities thrive, based on largely Professor Lobo with Chattanooga, Tennessee being kind of the example where, you know, fiber shows that when it comes to a community or when it's deployed in a community, it improves lives, social lives, connects people to telehealth and education and each other ultimately. But it also brings in industries. So some communities that had been losing industries over some years had deployed fiber either through a municipality or a service provider, and businesses came in and the community thrived, people got jobs. So fiber in a community also creates workforce. So Chattanooga, Tennessee was the example, the good example, which brought in 9,612 jobs or somewhere in that neighborhood. But that number's increased to over 10,000 since then, and that was a 10-year, Chattanooga's had fiber in the community for over 10 years. It also served as a smart grid project, or it was the foundation of the smart grid. It has tested performance advantages. You'll hear Mary when she starts talking about the particular research or the community that we're presenting today, talk about how, you know, technologically speeds increase with the communities that are connecting to the internet, and how it's best suited in rural areas. So you can go to the next slide. So today we're going to talk about or present Westfield, Massachusetts. Mary and her team at Futuriom had done a lot of research and talked to a lot of the people within Westfield, Massachusetts. It was founded in 1969. There's over 40,000 people, or over 40,000 inhabitants. It's also known as Whip City, and it's known as Whip City because it was known for manufacturing buggy whips with the horses. And also bricks and cigars were some of the main industries there. But like other cities and towns, things grew. So it was also known for boilers and radiators and textile machinery and wood products and precision tools. So the industry grew, or the town grew in terms of industries. The funny thing, though not funny, but I thought it was kind of neat that the tagline for Westfield, Massachusetts is business focused and community driven. So the people in the community really take advantage of the resources out there. It's kind of, or it's been described as a hamlet. So it's got vineyards and beaches and roadside markets where people will go and buy farm fresh produce or eggs, you know. So there's a lot of industry out there, and it's a very tight-knit community, and people really do know each other. So I find it to be kind of a neat part of Massachusetts. And next slide. So today we're going to talk about Whip City Fiber, and I will hand it over to Mary at this point, and she can tell you about the project.
Thanks, Debbie. Yes, Whip City Fiber actually was established after the Westfield Gas and Electric Utility had opened up, had allowed it to start a fiber optic pilot project in the city in about 2016. But prior to that, Westfield Gas and Electric had its own fiber projects. It had installed, you know, a fiber ring in around in 2005 that encompassed the municipal buildings and one or two of the businesses in town. And it also had its own, SCADA utility network, which was based on fiber, and supervisory control and data acquisition. And anyway, at around also Westfield Gas and Electric had acted as its own ISP early in the 90s, in the mid 90s. And they had done that by leasing internet connectivity and providing DSL to subscribers in town through, through a couple of the incumbent carriers locally. But by about 2013, the speeds of DSL, cable, and satellite internet were really, getting people down. And also the fact that it was intermittent, their satellite especially wasn't reliable. So the lack of reliability and the high cost really had people talking about potential solutions. So by about 2015, Westfield Gas and Electric petitioned the Municipal Light Board, which is its governing body, to ask whether it could start a fiber optic pilot project. And in 2016, the permission was given, and also the Municipal Light Board allowed WG&E to petition the City Council at Westfield for a larger grant to support a full-scale fiber rollout. And by 2017, that grant was approved. And to back up just a second, though, in 2016, prior to the establishment of the bond, WG&E spun off Whip City Fiber as a separate division and made a loan of $2 million to fund the initial pilot project. And that was so successful that the permission for the bond, as I said, was granted in 2016. And that was about $15 million toward a fiber coverage project that would span about 70% of Westfield. And anyway, by 2017, Whip City Fiber had begun to introduce the idea of fiber to the community, and they did so through a series of ads in the local paper, billboards, and they also went out on community outreach sessions. So at libraries and in elementary schools, they would have an evening where they had ice cream or cupcakes. And it turned out that people really had a lot of questions about what will the fiber trenching do to my lawn, and they had how will I benefit from fiber? And Whip City Fiber was able to tell the community members that fiber was not only faster, especially for video streaming and other kinds of home uses, but also that it would be future-proof, so that in the future, greater speeds and capabilities could be added just through a software upgrade. So the pilot was so successful that, it started to make money, and the money went back into the fiber project. And meantime, in about 2018, looking at the timeline here, the state of Massachusetts issued a request for proposal because they had wanted to introduce a better internet infrastructure to what's called the hill towns of the Berkshire Mountains. And these hill towns were really losing population. There was almost an outmigration because people would go to college and they wouldn't move back. The children had no choice but to go to the library if they wanted to use the internet for their homework. So it was sort of like an internet desert, and the only option was mostly satellite and some DSL. So Whip City Fiber actually responded to this RFP with a proposal of its own, which was that it would go into these communities and provide consulting services to tell them how to start their own fiber infrastructure, just like they had in Westfield, and give them guidance as to how to get it funded and where to start, how to get it going. And of the 40 towns that were asked to respond to this, 20 went with the Whip City Fiber proposal. And as a result of that, Whip City Fiber got into the consulting business with these partner communities, and they petitioned and received a $10 million 10-year federal funding grant from the Connect America Phase 2 initiative. And by 2019, those projects had begun in the so-called hill towns, which are called partner communities. And the hill towns the partner communities were able to start their own fiber. They were able to establish Whip City Fiber as their ISP, even though they actually owned the networks. The communities owned the networks themselves. And Whip City Fiber during the pandemic played a really important role because they were able to extend fiber to homes that didn't have it already by using something called a team box. And the team box actually contained the optical connections for the fiber network, and they would connect on one side to the fiber network and on the other to there would be a connection out to the home that could be actually passed through a window and plugged in by the router, which was external to the house, could be plugged in by the resident, and there would be fiber until the pandemic lifted and they were able to get fully installed. So that really helped people who needed to work from home. It helped children who had to go to school virtually, and it really, I think it heightened the, the reputation even more of Westfield Whip City Fiber with the community itself. And so now, looking at the present, Westfield is going to be completely served with Whip City Fiber by 2025. That's the plan. And there will also be a push to get municipality buildings and perhaps some of the businesses onto 10 gig fiber through a software upgrade. Westfield now has symmetrical single gig fiber and fiber service. So it's one of the only communities in that area that does have that. And as far as the benefits, you could move the slide, please. We wanted to just address for a moment the challenges that came along the way. When Whip City Fiber started to talk about having the fiber infrastructure in 2017, they got a lot of pushback from Comcast, which was the incumbent ISP. And Comcast actually took out a billboard and ads in the paper talking about how Whip City Fiber was a flash in the pan. It wasn't going to be useful to the community. Don't they want to rely on a more established cable provider? But with the sessions that Whip City Fiber was having at schools and libraries, they were able to tell the community that not only the advantages of fiber over cable, which were significant, but they were also pointed out that Whip City Fiber was an ISP that was peopled and run by local people, community members, and that local presence really went a long way to giving confidence to the community. They felt that if anything went wrong, they would be able to call someone that there was a member of the community in Westfield, and also that someone would come out and it wouldn't take 2 weeks to get service. So those, that challenge was met. Make ready was another challenge, and that pertained to the utility poles, which always have electric cable and also telephone cable. And between them, the fiber has to go according to very specific distances that are measured with lasers. And so Make Ready was sort of a very, at least with the utility poles, was a very, labor intensive and very careful procedure. So that, that took some time. Meanwhile, over 6 miles of fiber were run underground as well. So they had both, overground and underground fiber connections. You could change the slide. This just shows you a couple of the talking points we had, a few minutes ago. In one community, just to give you an idea of why people were complaining, in Massachusetts, 43% of download rates for cable and DSL were below 100 megabit per second, and 23 were less than 50 megabits per second. And upload speeds were even worse. In Falmouth, Massachusetts, for example, DSL upload was lower than a meg, and cable was lower than 15 meg for almost 80% of customers. So the broadband gap was also a problem that was exacerbated by population migration from Boston and New York to rural Massachusetts. So we've seen a lot of people, especially with work from home, tending to move out of the cities out to rural areas, and they want to have internet capabilities when they get there. And so they don't want to see a broadband gap when they arrive. They don't want to hear about DSL or satellite. Next slide, please. Okay, so just to summarize the quantifiable benefits, Westfield was able to benefit from the work from home trend, post-pandemic. And to give you an example, after the pandemic in April 2022, there were, at least on LinkedIn, there were advertisements for 4,654 work from home jobs. And that was for a population of over 40,000 in Westfield. And in nearby Hartford, Connecticut, there were 4,600 work from home jobs advertised for a population of almost 900,000. So you can see that Westfield really had a benefit, particularly in the areas of healthcare and education, where work from home and also the higher bandwidth really facilitated virtual meetings and made it possible for residents to work from home. So the total we estimated was that the job value introduced in Westfield was $88 million a year. And that was, given very conservative estimates of salary levels, even part-time salary levels, and also considering that 42% is the take rate for ISP customers of Whip City Fiber in Westfield. And it's over 70% in the outlying districts in the partner communities. So they have a very good take rate. Whip City Fiber has a very good take rate. So next slide, please. This describes what happened. As I said, the work from home jobs were disproportionately available in Westfield compared with, larger areas post-pandemic. Next slide, please. And just to wrap up, I wanted to give a couple of other quick benefits. Education in Westfield is, the schools are mostly, there's at least 17 schools, and they're all able to have a Chromebook because of the fiber. The individual students are able to be issued a Chromebook that helps them with their education. And fiber's also helped the housing market. It's attractive to people who are coming in and really want to know what kind of internet do you have, and they're able to. The realtor is able to say, "Fiber, we have fiber." And one realtor told me that's quite a selling point. And for small businesses, fiber is a great selling point. One fellow who is heading up Reliable Energy Analytics told me that he used to travel at expense of $10,000 per month, and so he's saving literally hundreds of thousands in travel time thanks to the fiber in Westfield. So that concludes my part of the presentation.
Well, thanks, Mary and Debbie. So this sounds pretty amazing. So just to get everybody's focus on the map, right? This is just right outside of Springfield, Massachusetts. Is that right? So you're west of Boston, kind of center of the state. Does that sound right?
It's southwest part of the state, just 20 miles north of Hartford, Connecticut.
And then it's kind of amazing. So weren't able to get broadband from their current providers. So the utility stepped up and basically created Whip City Fiber, and it sounded like they had a lot of community support to do that. Is there some inherent benefits that you saw from the utility putting up? I mean, because obviously the utility had the poles, the right of way, so, and it seems like they were able to get everybody served fairly quickly.
Absolutely, and they had the experience with fiber because they had the supervisory control and data acquisition system, and also the fiber rings they established in 2005 for the municipal buildings, and they'd also had experience as their own ISP by using leased lines from New England Telephone and a couple of other incumbents. And I think they made the best of what they had. They actually had employees from Westfield Gas and Electric manning the desks at Whip City Fiber, sort of doing double duty. And they had loaned them internally the $2 million to get started, but any revenue that comes in from Whip City Fiber goes automatically back into the project. So I think they've really done a fantastic job of working with their strengths.
So we saw in Chattanooga, with EPB, the utility putting fiber out, that not only was able to have that, as Debbie said, 9,500 net new jobs, but they also were able to save a lot of money from a smart grid modernization perspective, like $500 million a year from major weather events, from electricity. Also, they haven't had to have a rate hike on their utility, their electricity, for 7 years. Did you see any kind of benefits with Whip City and WG&E?
Not specifically that I actually don't know the answer to that question. I know that they continue to, be profitable, and Whip City Fiber is profitable. So that would be
kind of what you're saying is, in the Chattanooga, you're not allowed to subsidize the broadband from your electric utility, but you can use the broadband revenue to subsidize your electric.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
Yeah, so it seems like that would be real beneficial for a power utility to be able to subsidize, keep I think Mike Render shows charts showing that all utility prices have been going up with everything else, while broadband, continues to go down at a cost per megabit. So it seems like that there'd be a great opportunity. What is the service level now they're offering at Whip City?
They have symmetrical single gig.
The gig symmetric, and how much is that?
It's $79 a month, I think, for just the standard, and they have several tiers for business. So I believe that they charge $69.95 a month for residential gigabit fiber broadband. Comcast, by the way, charges $79 for residential cable broadband at speeds that are less.
Now, what I've seen in other communities is when you offer, like, same thing here, I'm in Huntsville, Google Fiber from Huntsville Utilities, and this, the incumbents, the cable and telco incumbents, weren't going to provide fiber for some time. But then as soon as Google Fiber came in, everybody had fiber. Are you seeing any kind of response, competitive response from cable and others to up their game now that people can get a gig symmetric from Whip City?
I haven't heard of anything like that. I know that Comcast still has quite a foothold there.
And as far as, there must be, as people move to, are they seeing a big influx of net moves in for, people now that can move from Boston and Hartford and these other expensive cities and have access to the same jobs? It looks like your data showed. Yes. Is there more people moving in and the economic impact for the whole community going up?
I think that's happening specifically in the partner communities. I think that they're seeing a real resurgence in interest in people moving there and in the ability to sustain their education and business networks. And so I think that that's really, been, especially for the outlying communities, a big boom.
Well, Mary and Debbie, really appreciate the work you're doing and helping determine the economic impact that fiber is making in these communities across our nation. So thanks everyone for joining us today. And I look forward to getting back together next Wednesday. We're going to be discussing unlicensed wireless. Is it suitable for closing the digital divide? This is with Larry Thompson, the CEO of Vantage Point, and he's going to discuss a recent white paper he developed looking at the limitations of unlicensed wireless as it relates to investment from public funds such as BEAD. So you're not going to want to miss that. Larry's always a popular guest. So we'll see you guys next Wednesday on Fiber for Breakfast. Thanks, everyone.